So this young man is the youngest of 3 kids, 2 older siblings, and answers affectionately to the name Mod. In high school, this guy loved football, but he was undersized like a lot of us. But he went out for the junior varsity football team. He made the team, and his coach was talking about him, saying that although he was undersized, this kid had a huge heart. And he was also the kind of kid that always tried to lift people's spirits, make them happier, make them smile. The coach went on to say, off the field, he had a talent for raising spirits and had a penchant for imitating his coach, Vaughn said, which is his coach. The coach went on to say, if I was standing in the hallway kind of looking mean or having a bad day, maybe my lesson plan didn't go right, Maud would kind of sense that about me. And he'd come beside me and be like, imitating the coach, I'm Coach Vaughn today. Y'all keep going to class. Hurry up, hurry up. He was trying to make me smile as much as possible, the coach said. And after high school, Maud enrolled in South Georgia Technical College, preparing to become an electrician, following in the footsteps of his uncles. But first, he decided he would take a break, that college could wait until the fall. And so to keep his head clear, he'd run just about every day. He'd go for these jogs. Off he'd go out the door of his mother's house, down long streets toward Fancy Bluff Road. Then he would come to a right turn onto a 2-lane road lined by oak trees draped with Spanish moss. About 1.5 miles into his usual route, Mob would cross the 4 lanes of Jekyll Island Causeway into a subdivision of Santilla Shores. 3 months ago, at age 25, as he ran through Santilla Shores for the final time, on February 23rd, he was shot to death by a father and son who thought that he was responsible for the break-ins in their neighborhood. Ahmaud Arbery, shot to death, 25 years old. Rayshard Brooks, 27-year-old black father of 4 little kids. And his niece describes him, her name's Chastity. She says she remembered Brooks in a news conference on Monday saying he was a loving husband, a caring brother, and most importantly to me, an uncle that I could depend on, she said. Rayshard Brooks was silly, had the brightest smile and the biggest heart, and loved to dance since we were kids. 27 years old, shot to death in a Wendy's parking lot because he had too much to drink, sleeping in his car. The police officers rolled up on him, tried to arrest him. He resisted, ran away with their taser, shot in the back, shot dead in that parking lot. And these are just 2 stories of the hundreds and hundreds of stories that happen of police brutality, excessive force. And if you're like me, your heart has been cracked wide open by seeing what's going on. And not only are hearts cracked wide open, but also the awareness that this is nothing new, that this has been going on for way too long, for way, way, way too long. Hundreds of years this has been going on in terms of the racism and the unfair treatment of black people. And yet, if you're also feeling like me, there's the question of, well, what can we do? Like, what do we do? And I felt so proud of us as a country, and not just in the United States, but countries around the world, so proud of people rising up, taking to the streets, letting their voices be heard, demanding change, saying enough is enough. Because what's fascinating about why now is different, because this has been happening for years. I mean, you remember other instances like this, and people being killed and black people being treated unfairly, and yet there wasn't the same outrage at the level that it is in the mass amounts that it is now. And so what is the difference? Why is it happening now? And I don't know what the difference is, why it's happening now. I'm just grateful that it's happening, because the fact that we're rising up, the fact that we're using our voices, the fact that we're saying enough is enough and that things must change, people are taking notice, politicians are taking notice, and you start to see the beginnings of these changes. But the reason I wanted to make another video and continue this conversation is because there is a real threat of, and you see it all the time, where there's a wave of interest, especially in the media. The media is focused on this, there's protests and things happening, and then it just fades away and it becomes a story that happened. It became something that people got all up in arms about, and maybe a little bit of change was made. But I remember being in my mid-20s, and I had the privilege of being in a meeting with His Holiness the Dalai Lama and other global leaders and spiritual leaders to talk about how do we solve the toughest challenges that this world is facing. And a rabbi got up, and the rabbi gave a message that seared into my mind. And he said, you know, I have a question to ask you, and I don't myself have the answer, but I ask you to consider this for yourself. And the question was, when do we stop business as usual? How bad does it have to get before we say, I'm stopping business as usual, before we rise up, before we take to the streets, before we don't just demand change for a couple weeks, but we demand change in a way that we are committed to seeing it through? How bad does it have to get before we stop business as usual? I remember that landing on me like a ton of bricks in my mid-20s. And we've come to I'm grateful for, as a nation, stopping business as usual. We're taking to the streets, we're rising up. And the concern and the fear that I have is that it's gonna go away. And I am making this video just to give you some reflections that I've been doing in my life, knowing that I don't have the answers. I'm not the expert on this, but I know that I've got conviction to do something, that every one of us can do something from where we are with what we have, to let your voice be heard, my voice be heard, and to demand change. And I wanted to share with you a couple of really big awarenesses I've had, and moments in your life where you had a belief or a mindset and it's been shifted or altered. And one of those was talking with one of my lifelong friends. We've been friends since high school. And this gentleman is black. And him talking to me about, he's super talented. This guy is a head track coach, author, writes books on poems for little kids. Just amazing man. His name's Ali, and Ali and I were talking, and he was describing to me what it was like for him to be the head track coach in Oklahoma. And how, in just one moment, this was long before these incidents had happened, and him saying that him going to have dinner with his family came out to see a track meet to support him and being the head coach out there, and they all went to dinner. And there's a reputation, he said, that in Oklahoma, there's a reputation, maybe this is for him nationwide, I don't know, but he was describing this in Oklahoma, saying the reputation that black people don't tip well, and so then they don't get good service. And so he said, so I'm faced with a dilemma at this restaurant, because we go to this restaurant and no one even comes up to ask us if we want water or food for an hour. We're watching the waitresses and the waiters walk by and they're just completely ignoring us. He goes, finally we had to hail one down and say, hey, we've been sitting here for an hour, can we get our order taken? And the waiter huffed and puffed, and fine, I'll take your order. And he said, so we placed our order. It was another hour before our food came. So we're sitting there 2 hours finally having our meal. It was a mediocre meal. We finally eat this meal, and then the bill comes, and I'm faced with a dilemma. Do I not tip them? They don't deserve a tip. The service doesn't deserve a tip. The food doesn't deserve a tip. But if I don't tip them, then I'm just another black guy who doesn't tip well. They certainly don't deserve a tip. Or do I tip them? And I'm faced with, now I'm in this dilemma, and now it's on me. He said, so I gave them a double tip. I tipped them twice as much as I would normally tip, just to say F you to these guys. I am a man who's going to stand by my convictions and lean into who I want to be, regardless of the treatment you give me. And what dawned on me through this whole process is just noticing how uncomfortable I was in hearing and reading articles about white privilege, and how if you're a white person, you have this white privilege, and it's something that you didn't necessarily ask for, but you're benefiting from, and that we're benefiting from as white people, white privilege, and just noticing how uncomfortable I was with that, and how I wanting to push that idea away and not own that, not claim that. And reflecting on why is that? Why is it so uncomfortable for me and so uncomfortable for us, many of us in this country, to have a conversation of race and racism and what that means and white privilege, especially being a white man in this country, someone who's benefited more than anyone else probably of the white supremacy and all of that, even though in my core wanting to reject those ideas, have no part of any racist thoughts. And as I was really exploring that idea myself, I thought, oh my God, for me, part of white privilege is the fact that I can turn on and turn off the TV and my regular life doesn't change much. I don't deal with racism. I don't deal with nearly on any sort of scale that black people do or people who face racism do. I don't deal with it in the same way. And so I can easily turn it on or turn it off when I get uncomfortable or don't want to deal with that. But my buddy Ali can't turn it off. He's dealing with this day in, day out. Another big awareness for me and wanting to know, okay, what can I do to shift this? What can I do to change this? Another big awareness for me was the idea that if I'm watching this murder happen on TV, George Floyd, watching him get murdered on TV, and I watch it and I'm like, oh my gosh, that's horrible. And my heart breaks and I'm like, that's horrible. And I don't do anything about it. And we'll talk about things that we could do because so many of us, we don't take action because we don't know what to do. Well, I'll give you some steps that I've learned to take, and these by no means all the steps we can take. But there's something that you can do. If we don't do something in that moment, consider the possibility that watching that on TV and not taking action is as bad as being there in person and not stopping someone else from murdering that human being. What if we took that level of responsibility? That we see me watching this and not doing anything is as bad as me being there and not doing anything about it. See, I think we would take a whole different level of responsibility. And let me just speak for me. I know I would. I would take a whole different level of responsibility if I'm there in person. At least I hope I would. Someone's murdering someone else, I would intervene. I would jump in. And so what if I could increase that level of responsibility when I see it on TV? That was an awareness shift for me and something that I'm committing myself to doing. Another insight that I've had, it was a big shift for me, was the difference between Black Lives Matter and All Lives Matter. Because early on, as I was watching the protests and the signs for Black Lives Matter, I had this thought. A part of me was saying, well, why not change the sign to All Lives Matter? Wouldn't that be more honoring of all races? Anyone who's faced persecution, all lives matter. My wife and I were talking and she agreed with that. And then I was challenging myself to hold a corner of my mind open to the possibility of why does it matter that it's Black Lives Matter in this moment? And in reading the research and saying that when you ignore the most intense pain points, then you're not able to fix those intense pain points. You're not able to really address the issues head on if you include everyone, that saying Black Lives Matter does insinuate all lives matter. And I opened myself up to that, and I had this awareness that if we go to the doctor and you tell the doctor, I've got pain in my body and I want you to heal it. And the doctor says, well, where does it hurt? And you say, no, all of my body is important, AKA all lives matter. All of my body is important, fix the pain. And he's like, well, no, you have to identify where it hurts the most so I can go in there and diagnose it. And that's like Black Lives Matter is where it hurts the most. It's where the most intense racism is occurring in the US. And so I had a real shift in my awareness to say, you know what, if I want to address and really talk about this and really focus in and really be a part of the solution, the best way to be a part of the solution right now is to get behind Black Lives Matter. Now, you might have a different opinion of that, and this isn't about me convincing you that that is. This is about me demonstrating that I was willing to be shifted. I was willing and open to having my opinion alter. I was real convinced on all lives matter in the beginning. And I encourage you that as you're going through this, if you feel yourself resistant or you feel yourself get defensive immediately, to hold one corner of your mind open to exploring that other perspective, to really seeing why they believe that way or think or feel that way, because that's how we come together. That's how we find solidarity. That's how we find unity. Whatever your position is, keep one corner of your mind open to seeing another person's point of view. When you have this instant reaction like, oh, that's wrong and that's not right, what if that is part of what's causing this problem in and of itself? And I've really checked myself in these ways where I react and I get defensive. Like the person saying, well, you're a racist. Like there's nothing that gets defenses up bigger than saying you're a racist. I have every fiber of my being wants to rise up and say, I am not a racist. But what if we could open one corner of our mind to saying, okay, where are all the places where I might have some racist prejudices or viewpoints or ideas that I'm not aware of or awake to? Let me own myself. As Gandhi said, become the change we want to see in the world. It's got to start with us. So I invite you to step into that. Hold one corner of your mind open to having conversations and exploring ideas when you might feel a knee-jerk reaction of defensiveness. That is the first signal to, what could I learn in this moment? What could I lean into in this moment? And so I really feel fortunate to have seen an interview by this gentleman, Ibram X. Kendi. And he was talking about the difference between being a racist versus a non-racist. And how being non-racist, everyone wants to be non-racist. Everyone says, I'm non-racist. And we put it on like an identity. I'm non-racist. He goes, but the challenge is non-racist is a passive state of being and it doesn't change anything. It does us no good to be, well, let me say little good to be non-racist. What he encourages us to be is to be anti-racist. It reminds me of that quote that says, the only thing required for evil to triumph is for good people to do nothing. I think the original quote said good men to do nothing, but we're all in this together. It's for good people to do nothing. So it's not enough for us or for you and I just to be non-racist. We must be anti-racist, because anti-racist means we're doing something. Anti-racism is about taking action. Anti-racist is about who you're becoming. And what I love about what Ibram writes about, he spoke about this in his interview. He goes, racist is about, an idea you're holding in the moment or a way you're being in the moment. And it's nothing to feel intense shame about. Is that you shouldn't feel shame about it, and it's not an identity you are or aren't. It's a moment by moment thing that you can change. So even if there is an idea or a way of being that, oh wow, that was kind of racist or even slightly racist, you can shift that and become anti-racist in how you're being. And he talked about the godson of David Duke, who was being raised to lead the white supremacist movement, and how he was able to go to college. Friends took him to the side and said, hey, look at the whole story here. Look at what's going on. And now that young man is leading one of the anti-racist movements, and how we can shift and we can be healed. And I love that Ibram's got, Ibram is a best-selling author, is a university professor, very well-educated man, and talking about how he believes there's hope. There's hope for us as a nation. There's hope for our societies, that we can solve this. We can shift the institutional racism that's happening in the world. And so really this was just a video for me to share with you my process, what I'm going through and how I'm trying to learn and grow, and a call to action to ask you to do the same. So I'll post some links of things that I've read that have shifted me in the description below, but there's a couple things that I encourage you to do. Number one is to move from being a non-racist to an anti-racist, meaning that you're willing to stand up. And many of you are. You might be the person who you're marching. You're making phone calls to the policymakers. You're doing what you can do, and I applaud you and I honor you, and I encourage us to let's keep it going. Let's keep it going, not just so that this becomes something that we're all up in arms about because we're feeling it right now, but because we're willing to see it through and commit to it. How bad does it have to be before we change business as usual? We're there. We're there. So let's take a slice of our life force on a daily basis or a weekly basis and lean in to this change. And I invite you, read this book with me. I got it today. After the interview I watched with him, let's read it together. Order this book. I'll put a link below. Read it with me. Share with me your insights in the comment section below. Tear this apart. I am in no means the expert on this. I'm just wanting to share with you my journey and my growth and to do what I can. And so some things that we can do, not only read these books, not only use your voice, but call your policy makers. Because attention goes where the money flows. Call your policy makers. You don't even have to know what policy necessarily solution you want, but you've elected them because they're the ones who can come up with solutions. So tell them, call them, write them letters and say you want change, you want to see something evolve, shift, fix, and for them to lead and provide you a solution. It can be as simple as that. I appreciate you listening. I appreciate you being a part of this. I appreciate you being a part of the solution, as I know I'm striving to do that myself as well. Appreciate you watching. I'll see you soon.